Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all again. I always forget what I'm meant to say here. We've got obviously tonight the guys from Pretty Decent here, so we'll round of applause for them. We've got Chris and James. We're going to be going through 6 beers tonight. In case you don't know how it works, 6 beers, around about half a pint each, roughly, and we'll be talking and drinking and having any questions and stuff. Yeah, but we'll let these guys kick off and just talk about the brewery and everything. Oh, and yeah, please introduce the first beer as well.
Cool. Hi everyone. Thanks for coming out on Tuesday. It's actually not that glum a Tuesday. It was a really glum Monday, but yeah, Tuesday's alright. So actually, no, I'm not going to thank you. Yeah, it's not on Tuesday. My name's James. I set up Pretty Decent about 5 years ago with my wife. I'll give you a little bit of a story behind how we set up. This is Chris. Chris has been with us almost as long as that, probably about 3 or 4 years, right? 4 years next month. So we're a really, really small team. We brew all of our beers in E7 down in Forest Gate. So that you follow the overground line, the Gospel Light line down. We're underneath there in one of those archways. We've got brewery in one of the archways, a tap room in one of the archways, and soon to be more brewery in 2 more of the archways along the way. Yeah, so we've been going about 5 years now. We brew a range of different styles of beer, and we'll talk you through a few of them tonight and sort of how we brew. Just so I've got a sense of it, who here brews? Is anyone a brewer? Anyone a home brewer? if you can leave. At this point. You make a tea at home. I'm really shifty, so you might actually have some skills I can learn from. So we'll talk to you a little bit about how we brew. We'll try not to keep it too long, too boring, too technical. I've got a few things for you to try and smell as well. If you want to go boring and technical and things like that, we can do. Unfortunately, our head brewer Chris is not here tonight. He's weirdly got an ear infection, which I thought you can't get over the age of 3. He sometimes at these tastings likes to have a few beers and get really, really technical on yeast strains. We can go there with yeast. There is always weirdly a question on yeast, and I don't know why. So whoever answers the question on yeast has a free pint in our tap room on us. Whoever, if it's a legitimate yeast question, first one out. But yeah, we'll chat you through. As I said, we started about 5 years ago. Basic story was I like drinking beer. I sort of started drinking beer when I first moved to London in sort of 2011. That was kind of the time at which I sort of thought, well, actually, this is this is not Heineken. There are beers you can drink that aren't Heineken, that aren't like Kronenberg, that aren't kind of mass produced and don't all taste the same. So I was kind of sitting there going, wow, there's different beers for different seasons. There's bars that change their beers all the time and don't just have the same beers on. Got really, really interested in it. Then went down the rabbit hole of actually thinking, okay, well, how do you make this? Learned about how you start to make it, and then started to homebrew myself. Took over the kitchen, and the beer was absolutely terrible, like really, 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 really bad for about 3 years. Like I'm saying, like really bad. Then about 3 years in, sort of got some feedback from a couple of mates saying, oh, that beer that you brought to that barbecue was not completely undrinkable, or like it did not make me feel really ill afterwards and stuff like that. So like with the confidence that I had killed someone, I was like, okay, cool. Well, there's a business plan in this. So at that point, Sarah and I took a startup loan. We took £15,000. That was enough to get us some tin cans and a deposit on the archway, the first archway that we're still brewing, that we're about to kind of outgrow now. At that point, we were able to then brew 250 litres a week, which at the time made us London's smallest commercial brewery. So super, super tiny, to the point where we'd also had our tap room in there at the same time, to the point where people would come into the tap room and say, what do you make in here? It's like, well, beer. And they're like, no, you don't make beer, there's no tanks. Like, oh, yeah, no, they're in the corner. From there, we kind of expanded to make about 1,000 litres a week after our first year. We now make about 4,500 litres a week at the moment. So we brew 1,000 litres a batch. From May, we're actually bringing in a new brew house and we're doubling in capacity. So we should be looking to make sort of between sort of probably 8,000 and 10,000 litres a week. But quite honestly, the first few years of the business, beer tasted like crap. Like I'll be honest, it's been a learning. We sort of built in. It's really only been the last couple of years where we've really hit our stride with what we're trying to make. What we try and do is focus on inclusivity in beer, and that's our kind of main value here. Is my background is in the charity sector. I used to work in fundraising for a number of different NGOs, and my wife's background is in the charity sector as well. So we always had a view that if we were going to start a business, it had to try and be a positive impact on where it was. Whether that's a positive impact because it brought people together, something like a place like this, whether it's a positive impact because money it generated for causes, or whether it's a positive impact because of the values it promoted. So what we decided on, being in the fundraising world, was that from day one we were going to donate a proportion of every single beer that we donate to charity or to causes that drive change. It's not always charities; it can be local soup kitchens or local campaigning organisations or funds. So we're very open about what that is. We make sure that that's a minimum of 2% of our turnover every month. And where we collaborate with different causes as well, we'll often go sort of like 10p from every beer. So we know that every single beer you guys drink tonight, we will donate in some part to charity. We wanted to make sure it was that rather than 100% of our profits or something like that, because quite honestly, when you write that business plan and when you made the beers I made in the first few years, no one's making any profit early on. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to sort of like donate from day one. And then kind of final point before I move on to beer would be to say as well that like you'll taste a few different beers tonight. So you'll taste a few pale ales, you can taste an IPA, a double IPA, we're going to have something darker, something sour. We do often talk about the fact that we brew small batch, but we brew big range, and that's kind of deliberate. There are a lot of places that I know that really dial in on one style and that's all they make. But we very specifically want to make sure if you come into our tap room, if you see our beer around the place or a few of our beers on, there's always something for someone to get to, and that was really important to us, because sometimes beer places can be, and I say this being a brewer, like they can be intimidating places to go into sometimes. Like, what do I want? Someone laughs at you because you choose something, or you feel like you should choose something exciting when actually you just want a lager or something like that. So we always make sure we've got a lager in, something strong, something session strength, something dark, something sour. So we'll always try and keep a range going. We have 3 beers that we always keep in, and this one you guys are tasting. So I probably should have got to the tasting because everyone started drinking. just drink away, and also if you're like, look, just start drinking fast if I'm boring you. This one you're drinking is one of our core beers. So this is a session IPA that we brewed called I Could Get Better at Tesco for a Quid. It's as we further can, it's a fond tribute to an early Google review. I'll give you a quick story behind this, and then we'll get into the beer. This was the first 1-star Google review we ever got, and the guy said, I could get better in Tesco for a quid. Obviously, at the time, I laugh about it now, but at the time, you're on Google, you're looking at, can I see who that is? Do I recognise him? When we first opened, I still look around to this day. No, when we first opened, Sarah, my wife, and myself, and our head brewer Chris, we brewed packaged. We still brew package label every single beer ourselves, but we were also serving every single beer ourselves. It was only available through our tap room. That was a pretty brutal early 6 months where you can see literally people in front of you going, oh, no, or yeah, okay, things like that. But it was invaluable feedback. But we got this 1-star review and sort of was looking around like, oh, do I recognise him? I'm not sure. Who served him? Was it you? Was it you? And then about 6 months later, guy comes into the tap room and was like, where do I know him from? He's the 1-star guy. He's the 1-star guy. And I've been thinking that, like, obviously you've got 6 months to sweat on that. So you're like, I'm going to have the perfect one-liner for it. And then you realise that actually all you do is pour a pint and say thank you very much.
They still looking for it.
Kind of went along and then poured him a pint, stayed very polite, and then left. And then the following day, we got a 3-star review. So that is probably my proudest moment. 3 out of 5. I was like, I always strive for 60% in life. That feels really good. So yeah, so we decided when we decided we were going to have 3 beers that you can always have in at any one time. We have this one always in session idea. We have a pale ale called the Greatest Love Story. We have our Hell's Lager as well, which imaginatively we've just called beer. We keep these in at all times, and we thought, you know, where better to start than our first 1-star review for one of our 4 beers. I'm going to hand this round now, a little bit of kind of base layer of this. If you guys just want to pour a little bit of that in, it's the wrong one. That's the right one, yeah. Yeah, no, that's it. So yeah, if you guys just want to take a little bit of this. So this is a session IPA. I'll give you. It's barley. So yeah, anyone who's got blue barley. No. So basically, just to give you a quick, really quick rundown on the brewing process. What we have here is barley, and that makes the first kind of. Those of you who haven't brewed before or don't know the process, basic process of brewing is you mix malted grains, so usually malted barley, but some wheats and oats as well. We'll come on to oats in a little bit. You mix that up with kind of hot water that's usually about 70 degrees, and you make a kind of porridge style. So that's known as mash. Do eat it if you can. If you don't, yeah, a little bit sweet, a little bit but it should kind of taste like a basic cereal. Should taste super plain. You shouldn't be getting too much. The basics of this is we will mash in a lot of this grain, usually about 350 to 400 kilos of this in a brew with hot water, and that basically creates a reaction that makes these grains drop their sugars into the water. We drain that water out. We boil it up with hops, and hops give us flavor, bitterness, and aroma. And then we drain that through into fermenters. That's at that point like a sugary liquid. It's known as a wort. And then we add yeast to that. The yeast basically acts like Pac-Man and eats all of the sugar in that liquid, transforming it into alcohol. So you should end up with much less sweet liquid, but has been converted into alcohol, and that's basically a beer. So the reason I give you a little bit of this is to give you a sense of what this beer is about. And this beer is designed to be super easy drinking, right? So you should be able to see here, it's quite light in colour, kind of straw-like colour, and the grain you might have tasted should taste quite plain. That's because what this beer should be about is just a little bit of fruit character on the hops. You should be getting a fruitiness on the nose as well. So we use 2 hops in this, one called Mosaic and one called Simcoe, and I'll chat about hops in a little bit. You should just be getting like a little bit of hip, kind of like tropical fruit. These hops tend to give a slight earthiness from Simcoe. Simcoe is one of my favourite hops because it gives you loads and loads of fruit, but also gives you a little bit of earth at the back. It gives you like, I've heard it described as like sweaty socks, but in like a good way. And there are good sweaty socks, I swear. There are. So you should just get a little bit of earthiness on this too, and that's why we like this combination. Is it should just be. This beer is designed to kind of get you going, right? Like that's why we have it as one of our core beers. It's like when you have a beer that you're bringing out all of the time, you want kind of like commercially, you want people to be able to smash a few pints of it. So what we have is should just be a little bit on the nose, tropical fruit from the Mosaic. Should be getting earth from the Simcoe as you finish, but with quite a low bitterness. So it shouldn't sit around on your tongue too much. That kind of earthiness should kind of act as almost like a drying flavour, so that it doesn't kind of hang around on your tongue. You can drink another swig quite quickly. So that's sort of this beer, which is one of our cores. There's not loads more to say about that, and I've also talked a lot of you in the first beer because I've tried to explain who we are, how we brew, and this beer. There's a question.
Yeah, might be a very silly question.
Yeah.
Well, the texture. So when I sip it,
Sure.
I know it's on like the Gaps one, but it's quite frothy texture. It disappears really quickly rather than.
Yeah.
No.
No. That's we'll come on to mouthfeel in a bit and texture because there's a beer where that's going to be really interesting to talk about. But yeah, so it is quite spritzy. We force carbonate our beers. So compared to a cask beer that you might have drunk from the non-keg taps. We won't go through a natural process of carbonating. We will actually force CO2 into our beers because we brew keg brewer only, which can give you spritzier beer. Yeah, sure. So the disappearing bit will be hopefully as a result of like smaller bubbles, basically. So what we try and do with a lager, we'll try and carbonate it quite quickly because, and this is where I might get really fucked up. So CO2 basically when you carbonate a beer, CO2 dissolves into liquid at really low temperatures and needs to be under quite a lot of pressure to kind of squeeze it into the liquid, if you mean. So we make our beer, we ferment our beer, we condition our beer right at the point where we think our beer tastes the best and smells the best it can. We then we have our beer chilled to as close to freezing as possible in the tank, and then we basically squeeze it down into the tank by applying a head pressure of CO2 so that beer in the tank is crushed as dense as possible. What we then do is we have a stone in our tank, it's like a porous stone that we then bubble CO2 into this kind of squeezed down liquid, if that makes sense. So that you're bubbling in as slowly as possible under as much pressure as possible and as cold as possible, so that these bubbles basically squeeze their way all the way into the liquid and dissolve. So that when you release the tap or when you crack the can, that should start to come out. So basically, the minute you introduce oxygen to the beer, the CO2 releases, right? So, but having that control, we dial that in based on what we want to do. Having that control means that carbonation can become an ingredient, basically, and that's where this might answer your question, or I might have just taken us around the houses. So carbonation can become an ingredient because the pace at which you do that helps. So a lager, for example, you carbonate it quite quickly. That process of squeezing it in, we do that quite forcefully because we want bigger bubbles. Because when you drink a lager, you want it to be quite spritzy. With these beers, and we'll go on to one which should be softer, we want them to be softer, initially fizzy, but maybe a little bit smooth. They disappear, kind of almost creamy, but not creamy. And that's from getting smaller bubbles, basically. And that's by doing it much more slowly at much lower pressures going in, so that the bubbles have a kind of smaller going in, and they're more easily dissolved. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that did make sense.
I'm really sorry about that.
I mean, I'm sorry, everybody.
No.
Sorry, I'll just ask a quick one. When you're very small, like you were and you still are, how do you how is consistency? If you've got the same beer that you're brewing again and again, obviously if you're a massive commercial thing, that's very easy to monitor everything. But when you're very small, how easy is it to make sure that what I'm tasting now is going to taste the same next time I see you? Or
yeah, no, it's a really good question. The answer is
it doesn't.
It doesn't. Yeah, no, the answer is 2 reasons. It doesn't. One deliberately and one not deliberately. So one of the reasons we want to call this the beauty, the thing that got me hooked on brewing is there are so many variables at play, right? From the water you use, the hops you use, the temperatures you have, the grains you have, the yeast you have. All of those things are so many variables. So you'll never make a perfect beer, but it's fun to try and combine those and make them too. The reason we kind of introduced core beers, and we've only introduced these about 6 months ago as kind of regular brews that we're doing every single week, is because we want to become a little bit more disciplined in improving things step by step. So this beer, every batch of this beer, something will change by design. Because we want to get better and better and better at brewing. We'll also, with our specials, we'll find certain things from other beers. We should probably say we have these 3 beers and then we release a brand new special every single week. It'll either be a returning favourite or it'll be something completely new as a recipe. Those specials quite often built off different building blocks. Like, I really like the aroma there. I really like the way that was carbonated. I really like the malts there or the colour there. So we'll kind of piece together different things from brews, but try and bring them back into these 3 beers. The other bit, though, kind of consistency, which is a little bit out of my control because of size, is our ingredients. The main one, to be honest, so we're the same. The process of making beer, whether you're 20 litres or whether you're 20,000 litres, is broadly the same. It's the same science. And it's the same discipline. Record your data, record what you did, look at what you did, and taste it back. You know, did that cause that? Did that cause that? We're obviously a little bit more susceptible to other things. So we treat our water on certain beers, but we do also like using water as it comes, as untreated, unfiltered. And obviously, living in London, the profile of your water changes all of the time. So we get our water analysed quarterly. This is an example of like a changing ingredient. And the pH level or the kind of mineral composition of the water always has changed. And that creates different reactions in your beer, especially, you know, water is 90% of the beer ingredients wise. That creates different reactions with the malts, with the hops sometimes, with, you know, how soft the beer can feel sometimes. So with certain beers, we'll actually kind of treat our water to make sure that we've got exactly the water we want. Hell's Lager, for example, is one where you want really, really clean, hard, sort of nice, crisp water. With our New Englands, you want soft, quite high calcium waters so that they feel soft and round. But then on other beers, and this is where the core, like, yeah, sometimes that can change, and we only get it analysed every quarter, right? So there's probably 12 brews of this beer in there. Yeah. And you'll see it spike sometimes. You'll all of a sudden see, we'll brew this beer, we've brewed it 100 times, and all of a sudden it comes out not a 4, and I should have said this 4.5%, which always mentioned. Sometimes it'll spike and come out 6, and you're like, why is that? And you look at, actually, because those minerals reacted like that with that water, it created whatever, if that makes sense. So, yes and no, basically.
Yes, but it's a kind of good thing.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. And
that's a good one this week.
Record what you did, measure what you did, like any science experiment, right? And then you can trace it back through. Yeah.
Excuse me, does it have to be drunk like really cold then? There's a lot of that's room temperature, isn't it?
Yeah. So this wouldn't be considered like a cask ale. This is a keg beer. So we recommend that this is served at about sort of between 3 and 5 degrees. So yeah, really quite cold. Yeah, we recommend upright in the fridge and drink them cold for sure. Certain beers can kind of do that. You don't want them too cold. You don't want them close to freezing because you lose aroma on them and you lose a bit of flavour on them. But generally speaking, yeah, we do. And the reason being, they are carbonated beers. The more they heat up, that carbonation comes out of solution and bigger than that. It's like if you've ever cracked a warm can of lager, it's foamy, right? And that's because, you know, these beers are conditioned to be sort of slightly fizzy. I realise I talked way too long about, yeah, enjoy the rest of that. We'll bring around the next one, then I'll see you about that.
Interesting going with a stout second.
Expect it last, didn't you?
I don't think I've had it cold enough. That off track.
I bought it simply because the name. I think
Everything you're saying, everything you're saying is being recorded.
yeah.
Slightly pinky.
Let's have a look at the ingredients. Hops, beetroot.
Yeah, you're back on the back on the way.
Sour as well. No, I'm not bitter.
It's probably what you associate whenever you go through it. It's like quite sharp. Yeah, exactly. It was an American brewery. Why? Yeah, Audrey, when she was in Texas, she sang that thing. She really yeah. Goldschlager. Yeah. Everyone used to say that, oh, it cuts your throat, so it gets into your bloodstream. Maybe we do a collab. PD Goldschlager. I mean, we still Highams. Yeah, it's like a proper upscale shop. You guys too. What's about like yeah, it's great. Treadmill bit actually so good. Zoom Peloton Okay, so this next one is a beer called Resist, which is a stout. I'll come on to the name of the stout because it's got a little bit of a story behind it. But this is a stout. So I thought I'd do this compared to the first beer that we drank, where hopefully you tasted a little bit of that grain. Stouts and dark beer, stouts and porters are dark beers. So first thing you'll probably notice about this is that it's a lot darker than the other one. We're just passing around one of the grains we're using. This is exactly the same type of grain, so still malted barley as that first one you tasted, but it's entirely different. It's a different roast of that. So a lot like when you can roast coffee beans, you can do different styles of roast. Barley can be roasted in loads of different ways to give you different different impacts. So that first one we had, extra pale malt, we didn't really want any malt character in that beer. We want a little bit of we wanted a little bit of kind of hop character. We wanted the smell and we wanted that little initial taste. Whereas this beer, we want you to be able to taste the malts. A stout is probably the biggest, the kind of one of the maltiest beers that we'll brew. And what you should taste on this malt is kind of weirdly, it's called chocolate malt, but you probably taste coffee. So it's, if you taste chocolate, I don't know that, but like, I've always wondered, does chocolate malt, it must have its name from somewhere, right? So we get this, and if you taste this, if you drink this beer as well, you'll probably get a little hit of this as well. So that malt that we use that I'm passing around is probably about 30% of the malts we use in here. We also use a mix of other things. It's what gives it its colour, but it's also what gives it that deep kind of almost slightly bitter, earthy note. So you should be getting a little bit of coffee on this, a little bit of dry, a little bit of bitter. It should kind of hang around in your mouth a little bit. And that's because of the malts we use. And that's sort of exactly the same grain, just roasted completely differently to the point of being burnt. I'll give you guys a third one to pass around to give you a sense of that. It should be in the market if it's not. Yeah. So this one that we'll pass around now is actually my favourite beer snack, and we use a little bit in this. This is what's known as caramel. It's the exact same grain that we pass around, so it's malted barley again. So starts its life in the same field with the same thing, but it's been roasted not nearly as much as that one, which has been nearly burned, but more than the first one. It's somewhere in the middle, and what you'll notice if you pick away at it a little bit, there's little crystals in there. It's a slightly caramelized malt, so it's cooked almost to the point of burning, but to that point of caramelization. And this should give you little sweet caramel toffee notes to it, basically. So when we're making, we'll use this a little bit in this beer just to kind of sweeten up. If we just use that first chocolate malt, all you would get is coffee. But we'll just sweeten it and balance up with a little bit of this. We'll also use this, a beer you're going to taste later, use a little bit in it, with maybe some more of our less kind of fruity IPAs. We might use this. This is a malt, if you ever drink English bitters, best bitters, things like that, this is a malt that's really, really sort of prominent in there. And it's kind of quite sweet, quite caramelly, toffee. And that's about all I've got on malts. But that's where it's kind of, as I said, when I talk about lots of different variables at play when we make a beer, that's same grain, but roasted 3 different ways. In the same way that you can roast a vegetable, you can cook a ragu for 3 different times, and it comes out differently. Malted barley can be used very differently. So yeah, we use a lot of that dark chocolate grain in this malt, and stouts and porters are kind of known by being dark beers. Quite synonymous. Stouts, obviously, most famous stout in the world is Guinness from Dublin. And porters are from the same family. So if ever you drink porters, you might drink London porters, things like that. A porter is a stout's full name actually is a stout porter. So a stout is quite often a slightly stronger version of a porter. Basically, it's maybe a little bit more full-bodied, a little bit more flavoursome. A lot of people kind of ask, why are they synonymous with Dublin? Why are they, why is a porter called a London porter? There's lots of rumours that go around, like, is a London porter called that because it was one day a pub just poured all of the empties into one pot and this dark mix came out and it was London's beer. The answer is actually practicality. So when I said to you at the start, one of the first things we need to do when we're brewing a beer is extract sugar from those grains. That extraction only happens at a certain pH level. So we need the right acidity. It's about, I think it's 7.7, but Chris, you can correct me if that's wrong, but I can set it confidently enough to 1 decimal place. No one's going to question it.
Yeah, it's easy.
But yeah, so it's around 7 or 8, basically. I say that. And that basically, if the pH level of that porridge that I said at the start, that there's the start of our thing, if that pH level in that porridge is that, it basically means these grains drop their sugars. And that's what we want. We want that sugar because eventually we'll turn that into alcohol, right? So the reason I talked to you about that is actually because of the question earlier. Different cities have different waters, right? And different waters have different levels of acid in them, different pH levels, different levels of alkali. But you still have to hit, every single brewer has to hit this magic number, this magic pH level to get that reaction, drop the sugars, and then make booze. So actually, London porters came about from a result of London's water being quite high in alkali, meaning that we needed quite acidic grains to balance out to get that pH level to that magic number to drop its grains, to drop its sugar into the solution. So those darker grains, those more burnt grains, when you burn something, acid develops quite a lot of the time in the roasting process. They're more acidic grains, which
which basically meant that London brewers could balance out their water and make booze. And this is like 200-300 years ago, right? So when people say, oh, how did porters come about? Was it flavour? Was that? It was literally because people were like, I need to make booze. How can I make booze? Similarly, like water profile in Dublin, then the opposite way would be, say, Pilsen in Czech Republic, right? Super like hard water, very clean, very crisp, very acidic. You don't really need much in the way of grains to kind of bring that down, so you get those super clean, crisp beers. If you're looking at kind of English best bitters, Burton is a really good example in the UK. So brewers talk about Burtonizing their water. How can I make it like Burton's to get a reaction? But originally, this all came about through just pure practicality. It was designed. I need to get booze out of this liquid. What grains do I develop to get there? So there's your history of stout supporters. A little bit to say on this beer. So this beer is a stout. It's 5%, and this is a brand new recipe to us, and you might notice something about this beer. This is a beer we actually brewed last week. We released it as part of the Drinkers for Ukraine initiative. So this amazing initiative, basically, when the war began, when the Russians invaded in Ukraine, Ukrainian brewers obviously were out of job, out of livelihoods, out of breweries instantly, or almost instantly. And they got together, and there's a group of brewers in the UK who kind of liaised with them and developed a recipe developed by these Ukrainian brewers. So 100% of the proceeds of this, so absolutely everything from these cans goes to the Red Cross's humanitarian appeal for the Ukraine. So we basically, Drinkers for Ukraine, said, look, give as much or as little from this as you like, but here's a recipe from the Ukraine. So they gave us a different malt bill, said use these malts, use these malts, use these malts, and then they said, and also add a little bit of Ukraine to it. So you might notice, if you hold the glass up, those of you who've got a little bit of head in the glass, you might notice a sort of purple pinkish tinge to it if you go up to the light. You can especially see it in the head. So sometimes when you have a stout, it'll be like a white head. It's obviously Guinness. You can sometimes have like a rust brown head. We've got a little bit of purple here because these guys developed a stout recipe and then said, right, add for every litre of beer you brew, add 50 grams of roasted beetroot. Beetroot in a beer, that sounds disgusting. So we put 50 kilos of, obviously we brew 1,000 litres, we put 50 kilos of roasted, we peeled and we roasted beetroot into this beer. So we put 50 kilos of beetroot into this beer. After it fermented, in it went, and it sat for a week on this beetroot. We didn't know what it was going to turn out like, but actually, the colour kind of came through, and there is a slight earthiness, that kind of earthy beetroot. It's not there really prominently. I don't think if you didn't know there was beetroot in there, I don't think you would pick beetroot out in this beer. But actually, when sort of and when we've kind of tried it with people who we've not said what was in, when we said, did you get beetroot? People have gone, oh yeah, I kind of do. It's slightly sweet, but slightly earthy. A really interesting ingredient to use. I never ever would have put in beer. But yeah, this was a recipe. So you'll see these popping up all over the country. I think there's about 20 breweries involved, and the whole brief was use these grains, but brew at whatever strength you want. You'll see it's called a Ukrainian anti-imperial stout. The reason for that being the strong version of a stout is historically known as a Russian imperial stout. And the Ukrainian brewers wanted to really go the opposite of that, quite understandably so. As a result, an imperial stout would tend to be sort of between 9 and 13%. The brief was to brew it up there if you wanted, or brew it down wherever you wanted. We felt that because it was an anti-imperial stout, we wanted to go the other end. We wanted it to be sessionable. We wanted it to be sort of easy drinking. So that's a little bit of the story behind the beer. Hopefully, you sort of, from tasting those ingredients, you get a little bit of where the malts are coming through. The malts are probably prominent here. There's very few hops in a stout. You use hops just a little bit to add a bite of bitterness, but you shouldn't be getting fruit flavors from this. You should be, if you're sticking your nose in it, you should be getting the malts, and then you should be getting that initial hit of kind of coffee, savoury notes, and usually quite dry. There you go. I was quick at that time.
I think a brewery called Low Tide, they an alcohol-free brewery. They did like an anti-dancing imperial stout with like 2%. Really, really good.
Oh yeah.
Not too close to the surface.
Yeah.
Went up the nose.
You can stop.
Too close to the surface.
Alex has done well out of it.
Lockdown. I missed it so much in lockdown.
It was the first lockdown, wasn't it? I think it was 6 Nations or something. And they were showing the adverts for Guinness, and like every advert, it was just like, I need a Guinness.
Nothing better than that at home.
You got the camera in you, so you can take
I saw it today, though. You know the nitro surge cans that you get from some bars. If you have a dual cleaner, you recommend that for exercise. I'll have a dual cleaner for Christmas.
It's so stupid, but I respect it so much. Yeah, I mean, we're saying it's like, remember having like, what was it like? I don't even know what it was. Was it gin or vodka? I can't remember. Yeah. And it was like when you go to the pub when you're like 16. Oh yeah, it cuts your throat so it gets into your bloodstream and gets you drunk like really quick. It's so cool. Look out for our next upcoming collab with golf.
This is a fruit sour.
That's good.
I did try and put this in front of the camera, but it's but that is working. Have you tried this one?
I think, yeah, he's got those down. I think mine. No, he must have sold it. Yeah. I did have
Is it? Oh.
I could do that.
They're live streaming this.
Oh, right, brilliant.
Brilliant cameras.
Yeah.
So I just put them in front so they can do all the thing. And my dad's just texted me saying, is that a slot fit? Six, including me. It's like 4. I've got a potentially stupid question.
Oh no, I've almost got a dull answer for it.
Now that you've seen how the beetroot works, are you tempted to use any other like root vegetables?
So this actually is a stupid question. So we put a lot of fruit in our salad. Now, I don't know if it's not a root vegetable. I like the colour of things. So it's different. I've got in my head a breakfast smoothie with salad. So like broccoli, celery. You know, like if you make like a super food like spinach, apple, banana, like superfood smoothie that you would drink bright green. Often they have like rice milk in them, so that will work as a lactose like in the salad. So I'm working on convincing the guys that bright green broccoli salad.
I would probably buy it.
So I've got a working title for it, which is shittest beer yet. Which I don't know, but yeah, like. And it almost got, so we plan our beers, like we plan our schedule quarter. And on occasion I was like, I'm going to get this is going to be in the schedule. What about this? And they brought down, they're like, you can do green tea, so we're doing it. But yeah, that's, so hopefully, maybe I'll use, I haven't thought about saying you like the beetroot in this.
Yeah, I like it.
Stouts and sours are good ones to play around with.
I did have a peanut sour once. It wasn't fantastic.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
That's really weird.
Yeah.
Because there's quite a few peanut stouts around.
I think it was London Beer Lab. Yeah, it was. I don't know. I was already like 4 points deep at the time.
I think you got me 4 points.
Continuing.
We didn't realise. And luckily we've never, once you use not one thing, you have to say on every single product, they want to take it, they know. And you were like, we're going nowhere near. So like if you include nuts into it, say we brewed and we use nuts or nut oil on the thing, obviously it's an additive. We would specifically with nuts, every single beer we brewed on that kit moving forward would have to say bacon, so because it's such a, so we would literally be bringing out like pails on lager. We stayed.
I'm not a massive fan of the peanut stouts. I like stouts with stuff going on with the chocolate malts. That's all I really stout. It's not peanut stouts and the chocolate stouts. It's kind of slightly cloying, sweet. That's nice. You can taste the beetroot. Probably only now you've told me.
That's exactly my thing. Was like when I was tasting it, I was telling myself it because it's definitely there. I wouldn't pick it out. That's what fun is a thing. Like not everything has to be like big hits.
Yeah, exactly.
We stuck a load of blueberry stout a little while ago, and that was quite nice because it kind of sunk into the stout. Like it was still maybe quite first or just have a little fruit. I quite like that. Yeah, it doesn't dominate.
Yeah.
Alright, so we ready? So, so this next one we're moving on, it's the sorbet course, I'm going to call it. So we always, when we try and do tastings where you're drinking quite a few beers, a stout's always quite a heavy one. It always like big multi beers can often sit in your tongue. Stouts are often quite a bit more bitter than a lot of the pales we do. So we're following this up with a sour beer, which I should say, if no one likes sour things, this is quite sour. So you may not like this. So a sour beer is made in a slightly different way, and I said that I wasn't going to put more malts around, but I am going to, and I do recommend that you chew on some of these. A sour beer is made in a slightly different way. The sourness is essentially it's designed to be sour. We are basically sour. We're slightly putting the beer off. We're infecting the beer essentially. It's with a good bacteria. It's good for your gut, so don't worry. But the process starts the same. Malted barley, but you'll taste a little bit of this barley, and hopefully you'll taste a little bit of sourness, a little bit of sharpness, a little bit of acidity too. So this is a barley that's been lightly treated with this.
This is a yes or no question.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Barley. I think it was barley.
Barley is barley, and on a base.
One barley.
Yes. Yeah. Can be malted, can be unmalted, roasted in different ways. So this no. But we do also use wheat and oats in our beer, but we'll come on to that. So this is a little bit. You'll taste this. Should be a little bit tangy. This is barley that has been treated with food grade lactic acid to give it that little bit of sourness. So when we're putting those grains into that water, starts off as a little bite of sourness, just to get things going on brew day. What we then do is usual process. We drain the water through. The sugary water should be there. Should taste really sweet still, almost like a sweet tea. Rather than boiling it up like we normally do on a brew day, we put it into our kettle. And then we and our kettle is basically like a 1,000-litre kettle that you'd see at home, like a big tank. And rather than boil it up with hops, which we do, and create flavour and bitterness and things like that, we let it sit there. We cling film it over, seal the whole kettle up, make sure that nothing can get out. And we introduce bacteria called lactobacillus, which is good bacteria. It's actually really good for your gut. So don't worry about the fact that you're drinking infected beer. This is good for you. Sours are good for you. We'll put it out there now. And what that does over the course of 72 hours, we sour. So you might see those of you that have drunk a lot of sours. If you have drunk a lot of sours, you might see the term kettle souring around and about. And that's basically, we've kept it in the kettle and we soured it over time. You can sour beers by adding more lactic acid in so that they just become sharp and sour, but they can taste a little bit synthetic sometimes, taste a little bit false and like just distinctly sour. Natural sourness from lactobacillus gives you a kind of rounded sourness. So it should be sharp, but it shouldn't be like, oh my God, I can never touch it. It should be eating a lemon sharp. It's kind of, I always think in my head, and this might seem weird in terms of drinking shapes. So are you drinking triangles or are you drinking round balls or bouncy balls or things like that?
None of us have got on board.
Chris is here as my sense check. So for me with this, when you've got a lactobacillus sour, rather than drinking sharp triangles, you're drinking triangles with round ends, is my view. So there's still some edges to it, but it's a little bit rounded.
So mushrooms first.
Yes. So anyway, so this is a kettle sour. It basically means that kettle souring day is great because it's half a brew day. So we always brew it on a Friday because we also can't block our kit up for 72 hours. At the moment, we're brewing 4 times a week, we're packaging 4 times a week, and it's a turnaround day if we need it, basically, for when things slip. So we have to brew a sour on a Friday because we need to leave it in the kettle for 72 hours for sour. That basically, that bacteria grows in the beer and it literally sours the beer. It turns the beer. So we test the pH levels, making sure that it's coming down. So the more sour it gets, the more acidity there is. And we also then test it to taste. It sits at like 40 degrees.
So if you sold this not sour,
it'd be hard to say because the sourness defines the style in terms of body and the fruits we use. We haven't. We have used similar fruits in a pale ale. I would probably say if it wasn't sour, it would probably be closest to I would say. But you do use kind of different treatments that right? So they do have different characteristics and adding fruit, which are not with the sour, so defines it. But yeah, so we sour this for 72 hours. Once it's sour enough, that's all good. It means that the brew day, sour day to brew is absolutely amazing. It's a half day on a Friday. You're doing half your job. You're on the beers by lunchtime. You're like, this is the best job ever. It's amazing. And then you come in and realise on a Monday you've got twice as much work than you actually. But no, sour day is a good day. So then, as normal, once we've soured it, we boil it up. So we use absolutely no hops in this because we don't want any bitterness. We don't want any hop aroma. We want sourness, and then we want a little bit of fruit. And this is where this is a fruit sour. So we bring it through, we ferment it, and then what we do during fermentation, towards the end of fermentation normally takes about 5 days. So end to end, and I probably should have said this, normally takes us on average about 2 weeks to make a beer. Some beers take 10 days, some beers take 4 weeks, but generally we try and turn around. The tank is taken up for about 2 weeks in our schedule with a beer. It takes a day to make that beer, and then it's basically a week to ferment, a week to condition, then we carbonate it and we package it on a day, sort of around 2 weeks later. So after fermentation, towards the end, this will ferment for about 4 or 5 days. We'll actually start introducing fruit. Because when we drink sours, we actually really like the kind of combination of some sweetness on fruit, some sharpness on fruit, plays around with literally a sour. So if this had no fruit in it, it would literally just taste pure sour. What we did with this is added 130 kilos of fruit. We added 50 kilos of pineapple, we added 50 kilos of mango, and we added 30 kilos of peach.
You make me feel so much better about drinking this.
It's 3 of your 5 a day, and it's got bacteria that's good for your gut. So it's basically Actimel, right? So we've got 130 kilos of fruit in here. And that fruit kind of sits air conditions, and you'll see it kind of gives it colour. So compared to the Tesco, you'll see kind of quite similar sort of colour, but thicker. Like this should be like kind of opaque thick, and that's because there is like fruit sitting in there. And basically on this, what we were looking for is peach to soften. So peach is quite soft to soften the sourness. Personally, and I should mention, we packaged this morning. You guys are literally the first people in the world to a few hours over us. We canned it and were slightly late here because we were finishing kegging it this afternoon. So what we're getting from this at the moment is the peach probably hasn't softened it as much as we like, but the idea was peach to soften. But that peach sometimes it's a fleshier fruit rather than a juicier fruit, if that makes sense. So sometimes it can take a few weeks to kind of change, and this will change over the next few weeks. Pineapple to give a tang alongside the sour, which I think does, I get pineapple from this, and then mango to kind of dry it out. So mango, you should get a little bit on the nose, just a touch, but it should actually mean that it finishes slightly dry. The reason we like doing that is because with sours, if you just go full on sour, it's quite hard to drink a whole sour. Yeah. Whereas if you introduce things, so there are 2 ways we sometimes brew sours as a German style called a Goza, which is adding salt and coriander, which means that things finish salty and a little bit dry and finish. Or we do things like we use mango. Mango is really nice fruit to go into beer because it does give you some quite nice aromas. It gives you a little bit of flavour, but it finishes quite dry, and that means that you can keep drinking it and kind of keep a little bit more down. So yeah, this one is cool. We released it. We were like, it's the start of summer when we brewed it. It was really hot that week, the week before last or whatever, when we brewed it. So we were like, what are we calling it? We call it T-shirt weather.
That was the summer.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm going to go to the untechnical question.
So we decided to name it T-shirt weather. We were like, yeah, this is it. So if we come out with warm weather, this is going to fly off the shelves. And we've released it like
yesterday. It's happened again, but we kind of quite like that we're releasing t-shirt whenever on a really, really gloomy week. Oh, thank you. So the labels
with a full glass of beer.
No. That's always what people are like. No, so the labels, I was going to mention a bit later on, the labels are all illustrated by someone who lives right around the corner. So it's a woman called Nana. She's got an Instagram at Cuckoo Jar, and she's a Dutch illustrator who we got to know through basically when we first started, as I mentioned. Sarah talks about this when she does sort of meet the brewers and tastings. She says we basically had no right to still exist after 6 months. We were like, the two of us. We set up with a bar that was breeze blocks and some wooden planks, and we were serving this beer in bottles that was like borderline safe. And we set up in Forest Gate, which was there, and we set up on a road where no business had been for sort of like 5-6 years, and had a bit of trouble and things like that. Local residents, like a really, really diverse range of local residents, really supported us and kept drinking it. Not maybe because they liked it, because you could see people because they like if we back this long enough, it might get good. Basically, it's always it. And Nana was one of those locals. And then as we started to pick up a bit of momentum, as we started to really find our groove with the recipes and the way we brewed and the styles that we were brewing, the first thing we wanted to do is we knew Nana she'd become a friend. She'd been drinking in there regularly. We only want one person designing our cans. And initially when we first started, we were very, very simple, just colours and then the name of the beer by style. And about a year ago, Nana said, I'm sick of just doing colours on a can and naming beer. Start naming beers and I can do some drawings. So yeah, she's a local illustrator. She lives literally 30 seconds from the tap room. And her brief quite often is our naming processes. Like if it gets half a laugh, it normally means it's going on. And Nana gets very little else than that. So she got t-shirt weather and decided that sloth hanging out in his pants and a t-shirt would be the way to go, which kind of feels like summer in London. So that's that one. It's again, she probably mentioned me. You can see it on the can, 5%, and yeah, containing those 3 fruits. So how are we going in terms of level I'm at? Like boring you, not boring you, fast and
great.
Just right.
Okay, cool.
You love it. Keep
I always ask that like 3 beers. Don't ask me after.
What do you think the market is for sours? Because most people that I know from the north,
Yeah.
wouldn't touch a
Sour.
sour.
Yeah, no, it's good.
I'm struggling with sours. This is one of the best that I've had.
Yeah,
no.
It's surprisingly quite.
Sourness for a beer is contradictory.
Yeah, no, so yeah, because people think it's off, right? And you think
No,
it's
just shit.
just that shit.
That's not what you're expecting this thing to be.
Justice. Yeah. I'm recording it. It's fine.
No, I like it. It's not off, it just tastes shit.
Is that why there's pants on the can?
No, yes, that's sourness. Yeah. No, so
It's surprisingly quite a big beer.
it is a really good question. Our sours are super popular. Our fruit sours fly out. They do have a very loyal following though. So sours fans, there are sours fans
I
around.
buy a lot of combinations.
Yeah, right, okay.
Boxes, and there's always sours in there.
Yeah.
And I only ever see them in there. I never see them anywhere else.
Yeah.
And I'm just concerned that, I mean, this is one of the best I've tasted.
Thank you.
But it's still unusual.
It's still unusual.
Yeah. Unusual.
So
If I took that to where I come from in Sunderland, in the northeast,
Yeah.
you would not sell one.
So we were up in Macclesfield the other day, and that was really interesting. Like we had an entirely split room on the sours, and exactly that. If you got an I grew up in Kent, so I grew up on 3.8% golden ale, right? Like so, and that this if you're drinking cars, it's as far away as you can get from that. But when I'm sort of developing these, when our brewers are developing, well, our head brewer Chris is developing these, we might not go there, but we might try and dial into something being sessionable, right? So, and that's what I would say. For example, I talked about the mango being dry, right? You might not like this because it's sour, but I'm gonna make it the same sessionability. If you like a sour, that you could session it like you'd session a 3.8% cask, right? So no. So we do, but they tend to have they've got a very loyal audience. Sour people who like sours, but they also have a non-beer audience as well. So a lot of people who come to the tap room because it's a local place. A lot of people who are into like natural wines.
Yeah, like a funky sort of cider.
Ciders, yeah. So we get a lot of people who say, and we keep a cider and we keep a small amount of wine in our tap room, but we have a lot of people saying, well, I don't really drink beer, but I want to try one because I know it's brewed next door. And we'll quite often, if they're going wines and ciders, we'll land them on this, and they'll go, oh no, I can drink that. So sours also, and that to me is part of keeping that range of beer in. So when I said at the start, like, beer for me is an inclusive thing, right? It shouldn't be elite. It shouldn't be like, oh, I make this finest thing and you've got to spend X amount on it and all of that. That can work both ways, right? It can be making sure that you know, we've got lager in, but it can also be like a beer for non-beer drinkers as well, right? So
a bit of demographics as well, youngsters like it.
Yeah, there are a lot of young sours. So we have
to educate the northerners. No.
Yeah.
I can say that as a fellow northerner.
I'm only poo, mate. I'm only
I love sours. Yeah. A lot of the contradiction being northern, and I am young, so I'm like the ideal sour drinker. I swear there's a brewery just outside Sunderland that specialises in sours. So our friend James is from there, he's from Sunderland, and it was his way of getting his girlfriend into drinking sours, or to drinking beer, was to drink sours.
Sour beer, I was like, where's that come from?
There was one they had here for ages. Yeah, as far as like in New Zealand goes, and that was unbelievable. It was so like such a salty but refreshing finish that it was just so drinkable. Yeah. I feel like we might have to go on Saturday. No, but I reckon we will potentially just walk to Ocean and then go to excluding me and Rob. I have 6. My dad.
You've got the bird pub. When you go right next to we go round, you go past that, and then it's right near Homestead Tap. Yeah, it's right by Homestead Tap. That's where Joe takes her. And they're walks.
Do you think maybe if we get the train, then we can take it inside? Too late.
Oh, no, they said the other one is it's got lactose, I think.
Tasting notes written about you.
It's in an archway, so sometimes you first
across the street so everybody's it's like 10 minutes on the
No, there's definitely not.
Get some beer shaped Easter eggs.
Yeah, there's a Canadian brewery called Collective Arts, and they do collabs with bands, and when they're releasing albums, they'll put a QR code on the can, and you open it up, and then it's like the album, just like the collab video with the brewery. It's really cool.
I'm sort of really cool.
Good idea.
All right. So we're on to beer number 4. Right? Yeah. So we're into the second half of this. Things get a little. Actually, things don't get too punchy from here. We're at 5.5% here. Then we go to 5. Then we go strong again. So hopefully be right. So this is the first of a couple of. So this is first of a couple of IPAs, and this is where I'm going to talk to you a little bit around hops and what this is. So IPAs historically got a slightly shady colonial past known as the India Pale Ale. The story behind it is East India Company shipping out to British expats in India during the days of empire were finding that their beers, their ales were going bad on the boat, basically. They were turning because it's what, like a 5-week boat trip in like the 1800s to out to India. So what they found was that adding lots of hops, so hops being the traditional ingredient of beer which gives you bitterness, if they actually just bombed those barrels full of hops, actually these got quite fruity, quite floral flavours to them, and actually masked the fact that the beer was going bad. So they developed the India Pale Ale, which was basically a very, very, very heavily hopped beer, initially again born out of pragmatism. This way, this can be drunk when it gets to the other end rather than people spitting it out. So IPAs by nature are very, very hoppy beers, and I'll say hoppy because that can mean a number of different things. And the hops as a plant give you three things. They give you, as I said earlier, bitterness, aroma, and flavour. And they do that by releasing two types of oil, one oil for aroma, one oil for flavour, and then they release an acid for bitterness. And what we try and do with these, with IPAs, is try and get a balance. So different styles of IPAs will have different things. So a traditional IPA, an English IPA, very, very heavily hopped during the brewing process. Hops basically, they release oils first, and then the longer that they're in contact with hot temperatures, they release acid. So when I said we boil our beer, we do that to purify the beer and kill any nasties, but we also do that so that if we're adding hops, we'll actually boil up those hops and get that acid out so that we've got bitterness. So that stout, for example, you want a little bite of bitterness. We added hops that don't really give you any kind of flavour or aroma, but they release acid, and we boiled up just so that you've got bitterness, because bitterness actually just tastes bitter, right? There's levels of bitterness, but there's not kind of, and there is sort of roundness of bitterness and sharpness of bitterness, but there's not actually different tastes of bitterness. It's just it's almost like a sensation. It's a type of taste. Traditionally, IPAs used to be really, really bitter, or they used to be an English IPA used to be quite softly bitter. An American IPA, and we brew a lot of kind of American styles of beer, pretty decent. American IPAs probably came about in the UK probably in the late 90s. They tended to be super, super hoppy and fruity, but super bitter as well. So you'd get these American IPAs, super piney, lemony, very, very bitter. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, a style developed known as New England IPA, or the hazy IPA, or the East Coast IPA. You might have seen these terms lying around. That was brewers in the East Coast of the United States. So it's using a lot of hops from the West Coast. So traditionally, the West Coast of the US, California, Oregon, Washington State, they used to have very much the IPA game down. Brewers on the East Coast of the United States said, well, actually, IPA is defined by being hoppy and a lot of hops in there. Why can't we brew a beer that has a lot of hops in it, but has no bitterness? Why does it have to be bitter? Why do we have to boil these hops up? So they developed the New England IPA, and this is an example of this. So what you'll notice with this is when you hold it up to the glass, it's hazy. It shouldn't be thick like the sour was. It should be a haze. So you should still more or less be able to see the shadows of your fingers through it. It shouldn't be murky. It should be hazy. And what that is us basically developing hop content into your beer. At this point, I'm going to pass around some hops. What I'd say with this is please don't eat these. But take a few pellets in your hands. Take a few pellets in your hands and just crush them up slowly. I'm just gonna get everyone to do this because this will make the next bit of life they make a little bit of sense if we don't. So just take 1 or 2 pellets, and if you can, I promise I won't make a mess of grab a little bit of that. Yeah. So with this, if you just grab 1 of these pellets or 2 of these pellets, whatever you've got. You guys just crush this into your hand. You guys just crush this into your fingers. What you should start getting is a bit of a resin on your fingers. It should be a little bit sticky, a little bit clay-like, more of that. And basically, that is the first hop. That is hop oil coming through. So this hop is mosaic, which is in the first beer you drank. It's in this beer you drank. You've drunk as well. So mosaic is known for being a super oily hop. It's known for being really high on aroma oils, really high on taste oils. It can also give you some nice bitterness. Yeah, it'll taste grassy and bitter. It's not really not worth it because you're not trying to get the plant itself. You're trying to get what's in the oils. So this is mosaic. So what you should do if you crush this up into your hand like that, you should be able to smell your hand, smell your fingers, and then smell your glass. And smell what's in your glass. And you should start to get a little bit of a similarity between what's in your glass and what's in your hand. And this is the best way that I've ever been able to explain sort of hop content in beers. So essentially, what we're doing with this beer is we're using this hop and we're trying to extract as much oil from this hop as possible. So what's on your fingers right now, we're trying to extract it, but without extracting the acids from this hop. Because if we've got the acids from this hop, we get bitterness. What we want is this aroma, we want this fruity aroma, and we want the second oil, which is flavour. So once you smell it, you've done it's horrible. Okay, well, this is what got me hooked, right? So with these beers, with this East Coast style of beer, with this New England style of beer, what we're trying to do here is we're adding no hops actually on the brew day, or very few hops on the brew day. What we're doing is waiting until the beer has started to ferment, and then we're undertaking a process called dry hopping, where we're bombing in probably about 20 kilos of hops at lower temperatures. So they're not oiled, so they won't release their acids, but they will release their oils. And the whole reason for that is so that they smell very aromatic, these beers. You should be getting fruit straight away when you smell them, and you should be getting like kind of fruity sweetness when you taste it as well, kind of sticky sweetness too. And the reason for that is through dry hopping, essentially, through adding a lot of hops very late in the process. These are super hoppy beers. To give you an example, we're probably using a lager to brew 1,000 litres. We'd probably use about 2 kilos of hops, and to brew 1,000 litres of this, we probably use about 20 kilos. So we're using 10 times as many hops, and hops make up about 70% of the cost of making a beer. So quite often you might see, if you question, why might this be priced at that or whatever, I've made an absolute mess. Where are you putting that? I could have won it. Don't worry, I haven't just dusted out your bar. That is on a list. These are very heavily hop beers. We'll spend a lot more on these because these are quite popular amongst a lot of IPA drinkers, because they should taste a little bit like fruit juice more than beer. There shouldn't be that bite of bitterness. It should be soft. It should be sweet. It should be fruity. And that's basically trying to get hop characteristics, hop oils
but not hop acids. And I'll come on to a beer in a minute where we'll try and get some hop acid out of it, so you'll notice difference of bitterness. What we did with this as well is we thought if we wanted something that's really like soft, if we wanted something fruity and sweet and a little bit sticky, we also wanted it to feel soft. So coming back to a question earlier about sort of like fizziness and things like that. What we did to make this a little bit softer and a little bit sweeter is two things. One, we added a lot of oats, which you might have noticed from the name. So this is a beer called, bless you, this is a beer called Murder She Oat. We basically released 3 specials in a row where we wanted to add a lot of oats into our beer. The reason that makes a soft beer is oats are very, very good at releasing sugars, but they release sugars that actually don't get eaten by the yeast. So they don't create alcohol, but they still sit in your beer. So basically, oats are really, really good for adding body to beer and adding a silkiness to beer. So you might have heard of like an oatmeal stout. We would actually call this a New England IPA. We might even call it an oat IPA. And the reason is we've added loads and loads and loads and loads of oats to this beer. Like 40% of the grains in here are oats, so that they don't raise the ABV up. It's not 8-9%, but you're getting thick, you're getting full-bodied, you're getting sweet, as if you're drinking, this beer should drink stronger than it actually is. It's 5.5%, but we feel like it should be thick and juicy, almost drinking like a 6.5, 7% beer. The reason you can't add all oats to a beer is oats are notorious for gumming up your machine, like your equipment basically. So when you mash it, and we mash in a manual process, it's 350, 400 kilos of grain. Obviously, about 1,100 litres of water go through the process in order to get 1,000 litres of beer. That's a big, thick porridge, right? Oats are very, very good at setting like cement in that porridge. And what we do when we drain the liquid out to kind of get that sugary liquid is we drain it through the bottom. So we come down and we come through the bottom of our tank and into the kettle. If you've got something that sets like cement in there, you start trying to drain it, and you get absolutely nothing out. And it's what's known as a stuck mash. It takes a whole day to unstick that mash, and you never get a beer out of it, and you spend your ingredients. You've got 400 kilos. I think it was your like second week, wasn't it? You were working the.
I think it was my first.
Was it your?
Yeah, you were rendered unconscious by a stuck mash.
So we used to, when we first started brewing on our current kit, we still brewed in the same space.
That's a rye beer though, right?
It was a rye beer, yeah, with quite a lot of oat in it. Yeah. And we used to brew on a Friday and then open up the same space to drinkers on a Friday night. And we got a stuck mash one Friday. And rather than leave it and like, we'll sort it out Monday because the bar's opening, we'll do this. I was like, no, I'm sure I can sort it. Ended up taking the front of the tank off and having 1,000 litres of water and 400 kilos of grain hit me straight in the face. And I think we're still finding those grains around the archway to this day, like 4 years later. There's still little bits like a sudden burst of flies will come out. It's like, there's a 4-year-old grain down there that we haven't managed to get. A complete write-off, and yet we still open. We just asked people to wear wellies. And the whole floor of the archway was about an inch thick of just this porridge. And we're like, but it's Friday night takings, you've got to open. And I think that was your first week, right? And you've stayed with us since. But
I wish I could explain that better. I don't really remember it, to be honest, but yeah, you were knocked out for like a couple of minutes.
I don't remember it either, to be honest. But no, so oats are notorious for like screwing your beer kit up, but they do give you big, thick, sweet bodied beers. What we've also done with this, which is a technique that's being used by brewers in New York a lot at the moment, we've added a little bit of lactose to this as well. So lactose adds a little bit of sweetness to beer. A lot of people think lactose is what adds the cream to Guinness or something like that, but actually it just adds a little balance of sweetness. So when we wanted to go super fruity, super soft, we also wanted to go kind of sweet and sticky. So this should be a beer that's sticky on your lips, sticky on your tongue. And we've added a little bit of lactose there just to kind of enhance that effect. So the whole overall feeling should be a little bit like drinking. For me, it should be like drinking like a Solero ice cream. Basically, you're getting a little bit of tropical fruits on the nose, and then you're getting sweetness. But it's still an IPA. It just kind of flips what traditionally you might think an IPA is.
I think that's everything I've got on that. Has anyone got any questions on that? I'm getting from the looks of this isn't the sort of IPA that a lot of people like drinking.
I really like it. Really like it.
It's just the way I talk about it.
Do you want to pat on the back?
Why all your beers cloudy?
So I did. This is sorry. I did actually need to mention this. So cloudy, it's actually meant to be hazy. So why so because you want clarity, you want bright beers. Yeah.
Ruby or
Yeah. So you want bright. You want to be able to see through. Yeah. So it's exactly because of what you got in your fingers, that resin here. So in order to get that aromatic, and these are often known as hazy IPAs or hazy beers. And it's exactly that. So that haze isn't like, it shouldn't be mistaken with a cloudy cask beer where it's hot or bad or anything like that. So this is the, but that's why I said this should be a haze, not a cloud, right? So it should never be a murk, it should be a haze.
And what's the difference between the haze and the cloud?
Right, so what this is that oil that's on your fingers. What we've done we've basically soaked the hops in the beer at low temperatures for about a week, right? So that they give off their oils but don't give off that acid, as I mentioned. So what that is that oil in suspension.
Right.
So and it's there to give you aroma. That oil, that haziness won't actually give you that much. It'll give you a bit of taste. It won't give you bitterness, but it's there for aroma. And the whole thing is, you hold that oil in suspension so that when you crack the can, when you smell it, you should get hit by fruit. You should get hit by that. So it's there deliberately.
And that will translate into flavors.
It's an oil. It's not malt. It's not yeast. It's not going to turn your stomach bad. It's just oil. But that's also why they've got it's quite an expensive way to make beer, because that oil is so fragile. Over time, it fades. So the aroma fades. And also that haze is not stable. That's not going to sit there for 12 months, 18 months. It's slowly dropping through the beer. Now, we do things with our beer, so by adding oats to try and hold up gravity, right? But if you left that pint or if you left that can for probably 12 months, it would look a lot clearer, and you'd probably have a little bit of oil in the bottom of your glass. So it's hop oil, there for aroma. But that's where it should be haze. It should be a kind of oil in solution, which should give you a haze rather than murky. You know, if you've got something murky or vegetal, that's either hot matter or malt or yeast in there. So yeah, deliberately, I should have mentioned that. So yeah, it's one of the key things of the style. Yeah.
What's the shelf life of a hazy IPA?
So we put the shelf life of these on 6 months. It's not, you can drink it, as I said, that's in order to enjoy it as fresh as you can. So the hop aroma fades, those oils are the most fragile, which is why obviously we don't introduce them when boiling, because they just boil off and they burn off. So we believe, I mean, they start to fade around 3 months. They would fade to the point of probably not being the beer we want to serve about 6. You could drink it. It's not gonna go off, like in terms of like it turning your stomach or being good to drink. You could probably drink it for about 18 months. But it's just not what we want. You know, it'll probably be a little bit of a dull beer because you won't get that bitterness, you won't get that aroma, and they're the things we're trying to play with, right? So that combination of aroma. So if this smelled of absolutely nothing, and you weren't getting bitterness, you won't get.
You get a little.
I can still tell my wife I can't throw it away.
Yeah, you're still good. You're still good.
Unless it's a sour, then you throw it away.
Sometimes you don't drink the class in them, right?
Sorry, are you completely self-taught? Self-taught?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So,
yeah, we're called on the job brewers.
So initially, yes, I was. And obviously you go down that rabbit hole of understanding every little bit. As the beer started to get better, and as I was starting to think, okay, like I want to develop this a little bit more, I was working at a brewery down in South London in Croydon for a little bit, which helped me understand sort of like the commercial processes of brewing and how to scale up. So I was making like 30 litres, 50 litres a batch in my kitchen. And so, yeah, broadly self-taught.
No course, no sort of.
No. So our head brewer, so I
You're
don't.
not a science background.
Not a science background, no. So.
Come on.
I do look back and go, I wish I'd gone to David because they would have done me a lot of good. And if they told you that you could make this in chemistry, then I think I would listen. But, no, like generally self-taught. I get involved, and at the moment, as I said, our head brewer is off, so I am brewing and I am packaging. I do a lot of our packaging now, so kind of cellaring the beers through and making sure that they're perfect in can and keg and things like that. Our head brewer tends to brew a lot more, and he actually was like a furniture cabinet maker by trade, but again, it's the same kind of transferable skills of like real attention to detail, wanting to get the tiny things right. And he's sort of skilled up. And then we have Chris here who comes to tastings taste. So Chris is a qualified like a beer taster. So I personally, to be honest, don't have the most. I don't just get a glass of wine and go, I get gooseberries, I get this. I have a technical palate, so I don't have that right. So I did that and I will look for that. Whereas Chris has a lot more of a natural palate. So he says, okay, as I was tasting that, I could get this and this. So Chris runs a lot of our sort of London and national sort of sales and things like that, but it's also our qualified taster. So we each kind of, there's a team of like 5 of us full time, and we each kind of try and pick off different parts of the whole process so that everyone's got a bit of an input into what beers we make and what we make. But yeah, it tends to be me and our head brewer tend to kind of finalise the recipes.
What's the sphere of influence and how far do you?
It's gone. The last, as I said, up until a year ago, 2 years ago,
it's very much within the
very,
postcode.
2 postcodes, E7, E11. I'll be honest, we genuinely thought when COVID hit, we were done. So we actually fire sold the stock we had, and just like, well, actually this at least would minimise the debt we had. And it went in 6 hours, and we brewed another batch, and that went in 12 hours. And then we haven't stopped brewing since, and actually managed to grow. And it's been the last 6 months, really, has the sort of London and nationwide sales have set off. So we do a sort of Chris maps where we are and what we're doing. We're as far north as the Shetland Islands. Weirdly, we were on 4 of the 5 taps during pub quiz night in one of the Shetland Islands, which we were like, that's some fun tap takeover.
We thought we should send Chris, our head brewer, up there for a tap takeover.
Yeah. And then we're as far down as Newquay in Cornwall. So we are kind of national, like we're not a big national, so like we brew 4,500 litres a week, right? So that translates as broadly about 4,000 pints.
Do you sell online?
Yeah, so we're online and it's literally, and it's usually what I say thanks for coming. So it's literally like we're super local, word of mouth. People like you guys going, you know what, I want to come and try the beers, and I'm interested. Like it kind of blows us away because we were not there 18 months ago. So I do have we do have a regular subscription program. I've not forgotten that. Yes.
Have you ever considered free? We brew an alcohol brew. Yeah?
Yeah, so we brew one alongside an alcohol specialty brewer. So it's like a collaboration. So it's like it's an alcohol
Too sweet or too sour.
The first people to see what I've been looking forward to trying them. I saw the can of it online. RBG, Notorious RBG, and the can is like this import like road. It's pretty good. Yeah. Like the wrap on it. We're gonna go there. Let them know what time we're going on Saturday.
I've seen it quite a few times. Depending what state I'm in, I might go to the kids and like the court, I might come from there. And then Watford with the South End.
I think we were quite got a couple of beers next to the we're like trying to win by this one, then you got big finish. So this is a beer called the Notorious RBG. It's 5.5%. We wanted to give you this after, maybe we should have done it the other way around, I'm not sure. We wanted to give you this after kind of soft, big, fruity RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I'll come on to it in a little bit. Yes. So we wanted to give you this beer as a little kind of counterpoint to the last one you drank. So you should be getting a bite of bitterness from this. Yeah. For my palate, too much bitterness, but I'm of the Verdicchio crowd, a very, very soft, very, very fruity. What we wanted to do here, same hop is the base bone of this, Mosaic again. We paired it as we did with the Verdicchio. We do pair it with other hops, but the different hops give you different things. So some hops are really, really good at giving you aroma because they got loads of oils. Some hops are really, really good at giving you bitterness because they got loads of acid. So traditional English hops like Buggles, East Kent Golding, and stuff like that they're quite high acid content. So they're good for bitter beers, for stouts, and things like that. Mosaic, as I said, is a great all-rounder. It gives you great bitterness, gives you great taste, gives you fruity aroma when you want it, but you can use it different ways. So
this is a beer where we used mosaic much earlier in the process, so we boiled a little bit of mosaic. It's actually mosaic extract we used here in the beer to give a little bit of pine coming through. But then we actually used an Australian hop. So hops grow a lot in good wine growing conditions, or at least very, very fruity hops do. So you see a lot of hops growing in the Pacific Northwest of the US. So, you know, wine country in the US, Oregon, California, Washington State. You see a lot of hops growing in Australia, wine country. A lot of hops coming out of New Zealand now, fruity hops in Nelson, sort of where a lot of the kind of Marlborough region, like wine growing region. And what we wanted to do here was create a beer that kind of spanned the globe. And the reason was this is a beer. So unfortunately, she's just had to return to the USA. But our assistant brewer Audrey and my wife Sarah are obviously very have kind of grown up in a small team, but also in a beer industry which is fairly male dominated and can be quite intimidating to women. Sarah is much better, I must say, at kind of talking of her experience. And I don't want to talk on behalf of Sarah and Audrey's experience, but Sarah talks always about when we first set up, being as passionate about what we were doing as a startup as possible, but someone asking Sarah a question about the beer and then looking to me for the answer. And little microaggressions like that are very, very common in the industry. So what we've done for the last few years is there's in the brewing industry there's the International Women's Day collaboration brew, where women in the brewing industry, in the beer industry, drinkers, just anyone who likes beer, on International Women's Day creates a beer. And everyone kind of gets in touch and says, you know, we do different things. There's full creativity. There's sometimes a theme, sometimes there's not. But this is a beer that's entirely created by women and entirely developed by women. So Sarah, Audrey, and our designer Nana brewed this together, and then brought in a few kind of local women who have been enjoying our beer and who drink a lot of our beer, came down and brewed it on the day. So we kind of threw the doors open and said, if you want to come in, we're starting to brew at 8, and it'll go all day, and there's beers if you want it or not. So, and the whole concept of this was to promote the role of sort of women in the beer industry. So decided to name it after Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So we went with the notorious RBG, which is a little play on words. I say we, it wasn't anything to do with us here. This is why I often feel like you're getting this second hand. You very much are. And the whole thinking here was wanted to create an IPA that could be accessible to all people, right? So it should have fruit on the nose. You should still get that fruit. That comes from Galaxy, which is, and I'll come on to this second bit in a minute. It should have that bite of bitterness. If you like your more traditional English IPAs, your bitters, your things like this isn't going to speak to you entirely. It's probably still going to be quite fruity, but you should get a bite of bitterness that you might recognise in sort of like some of your cask beers and things like that. And it should be quite soft, those stills, and enjoyable. It should be something that, you know, non-beer drinkers can still drink a little bit of. We talked a lot, and Audrey, our assistant brewer, is an American. She wanted some American hops in there, and then we were talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and actually decided that her impact and her legacy spreads the globe. So one thing that we wanted to do here was there's 3 major hop growing kind of continents. There's the Australasian sort of region. There's the North Americas, and there's Europe. And we want to make sure that there's hops from each of those continents in there, because we felt like Ruth Bader Ginsburg has a kind of global reach. It reaches more than what she just did in the Supreme Court in America. Her message goes a lot further, and she broke a lot more glass ceilings than just in the US. So we've put a hop from the US, Mosaic, which I've talked to you at length about, and you've smelled it before.
we've put a hop called Galaxy, which you should be getting a little bit. Galaxy super tropical, can be a little bit grassy, so you should get a bit of grass there. Galaxy is grown in Australia, in wine grown region of Australia, and then we've used a really interesting hop from Germany called Mandarina Bavaria, which should give you some orange. So there should be a little bit of almost like orange peel on this. And that hop's really interesting because Germany traditionally are, and I hope I don't cause any offence here, but Germany are big on, there are purity laws in German brewing. The beer should only ever be made with barley, hops, yeast and water. Nothing more than those four. And actually, German brewing is progressing beyond that, and obviously a lot of our beers, none of our beers hit those laws because they've got oats, they've got wheat in them, they've got fruit in them sometimes, and things like that. And Mandarina, so German hops traditionally are very traditional, very kind of floral. They're good in lagers. They give you a bit of bitterness, but not loads. And this is German hop growers' answer to super fruity American hops, Mandarina Bavaria, and we're loving it at the moment because we don't feel brilliant about the fact that the hops that we want to use for big fruity IPAs have to travel half the world to get to us. Like, that doesn't feel great. It is the only hops that we found that make the product we want to make. But this has been the first hop that's really come to us that said, okay, this has traveled a fraction of the distance. It's probably had a lower impact on the environment, but it's kind of giving us the characteristics I want. Super fruity, super kind of like orange. So we're using a little bit more of Mandarina over the next few years. Yes.
This might be a very ignorant question, but hops in the brewing process seem to be mainly aroma and flavour, etc. And it doesn't seem to have much impact in terms of fermentation or anything like that. I don't know. But why, or not why, but are there any other, because there's loads of other things that give oils. So why is it hops that traditionally brewers have always used?
So traditionally they use because they give you that level, there's a plant that gives you that level of acid that gives bitterness. So the oils were kind of discovered later. So they were there to create bitterness essentially. I don't actually know, to be honest, why it was that plant and not some other plant that can give you bitterness when boiled up.
People try another thing?
You have nettle beer, you have mead, you have things like that. So there are probably different things. I'm not well versed at all in that space, but yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be
specific, isn't it? That everyone uses hops.
Yeah, no, very
much to that. Sorry.
Yeah,
but I think it was juniper plants.
Yeah.
So the very start beer, but rather than hops, it was juniper twigs we used to give that bitterness.
Right.
But then obviously, not everybody's got that. Also, somebody realised, well, hops do the same thing, and it's also got a bit of flavour and preservative.
Yeah.
So it wasn't always hops. There were juniper twigs used for making beer.
I mean, in terms of trying to get all sorts of different flavours and everything, hops, there's a whole world of things that give oils and
and
textures and flavours and everything.
Some of those get used, and I didn't know the juniper origin, but it makes sense. And I know of a brewery in Finland that make beer primarily by using things foraged in Finnish forests, which I can't say after 5 beers. Foraged in Finnish forests. There we go. We'll play it up. And their whole thing is we do that, and so I think plants in general are used in that way.
Right.
I think hops in terms of the styles we use are there.
But everyone uses
and generally everyone uses. I can't say much more than that. It doesn't mean you can't do it.
Economies of scale, because hops are so high producing compared to other ones. So you see hops, you see them 6 feet, 8 feet tall.
We were saying they're expensive.
Yeah, most of these, and the economies of scale is important. Most of these hops, so the hops mosaic, I've talked to you about Simcoe, Citra, these famous American hops now. These are also, if you see on the bag when they turn up, they've all got their little they've got their little trademark, they've got their little copyright there. They're all proprietary hops, right? So these guys have bred them over 10, 15 years to be the product they want them to be, and there's only a limited amount of them. So coming back to, again, small brewers and inconsistencies, when we were very, very small, we had to kind of scrabble around what hops can we get, what can we get, because there's only a limited amount that's planted and harvested. Whereas we're just at a level now where we actually work with the farmers in the US, in Australia, in Germany, and we talk to them about what do we need next year. So I've actually signed our contracts this week for 2023 because hop harvest is going to be, hops are being planted now that will be harvested in 6 months. I've said we need X tons of this hop, X tons of that hop, or whatever it is, because there's only a limited amount available. So they are high yield, but there's limited supply. So that also, again, kind of plays into the recipes that some breweries do or don't use because of like availability. So
Do you feel there's always a kind of tipping point when we move away from hops?
Not away from hops. I don't see so. Everyone asks, is there going to be a tipping point where we move away from like really fruity, hazy IPAs? I actually don't believe so. They were, when they first were launched, it was, oh, this is a fad. So there were other kind of flash in the pans that happened. So black IPAs for a while were a huge thing, and then they sort of went away. Although they're having a little renaissance recently.
Yeah,
black IPAs and super bitter IPAs kind of thing. This kind of hazy style is kind of stuck. I think there is a bit of a.
The hazy style hasn't stuck. The majority of beer sold in this country is not hazy.
The majority of this beer sold in this country, though, is ale. It's lager.
I agree.
So yeah, we're still kind of talking even within that is within maybe 15-25% of the market.
Just go with the point. The bar is still hops.
Yeah.
No, it's the contribution costs. I think there are alternative that's coming through, or
so there are hop products that are coming through.
Yeah, there are blends.
So
the RPG, right? That's Mosaic.
It's incognito, yeah. So there are hop products coming through. So either blends of different hops.
So we're focused on hops.
Still hops, or there's like hop extracts and gels which allow you to extract the best things you want without using the weight and the. So
the reason I'm interested is that we were talking earlier about 200-300 years ago when people were just brewing shit to make it happen.
To make it happen.
Yeah. But were there times back then when they were considering other local things that maybe were able to be reconsidered now?
It's a good question. So one of the ones, so coming back, and this is probably music to sours. So honestly, back 200-300 years ago, Goza is one of the older beer recipes, which is a sour beer brewed with salt and coriander. There's the Belgian Gueuze, which are naturally fermented beers. Now they're coming back a lot. They tend to not. They tend to, if anything, have a tiny amount. So sours tend to not have much hop in them, but there's a lot of brewers now making naturally fermented. So going back to rather than using. So we tend to add yeast and it ferments beer and things like that. But there's yeast in the air all around us, right? So there's the way sort of Belgian naturally fermented beers happen is that you put the beer in what's known as a cool ship or a cool ship, basically. You cool it to a certain degree and you expose it to the elements and all the yeast drops in and fermentation starts. That's hugely popular at the moment, and there's a lot of breweries doing a lot on that.
I'm from the northeast, and my local brewery there used to be called Volks. I did the tour, as you do, as a boy, and their bats were open.
Yeah,
they were very open, very large surface areas.
Yeah, and now
they have big towers for all the hops and yeast and the mash, but the actual stagnation piece was
all be open, so you could see the liquid.
Yeah,
and that'll be to try and keep it at the right temperature. That'll be natural fermentation. I'm trying to think.
Well, I think rather than thinking of beers being hop based, it's more that they're hop forward or they're not
particularly hop forward depending on the style. So all beers are kind of hop based in that hops will always be present in the beer that you're drinking, whether it's a extra special bitter or any traditional English style that you can think of, or something that's a bit more new world like these beers that we make that are a bit more of the east coast of America. They're still hop based beers in that sense that hops are always present in there, but it's where you're using them in the beer to give the effect that you want to get from that style what you want that style to be, right? So it's always going to be a big playing factor, right? Hops are always going to be there, but rather than thinking of a beer being hop based or not, I think it's probably an easier way of thinking about that might be whether it's hop forward or not, whether the hops are a real present part of the flavour of the beer that you're drinking. Like with these hazy beers, a lot of the haze comes from the fact that we're adding the hops in the cold side.
From the brew, but the financier here is really less hops.
It depends. And this is the beautiful thing. They fly hoppy beers fly off the shelves. Yeah. So
I'm trying to understand the balance.
No, it's really so. I'll be open. Our margin is best on stouts and lagers.
Yeah, it's like cheap to make.
Cheap to make. Best ingredient. Lager, I always every time we release lager, I'm like, we should just be a lager brewery because it sells fast and it's cheap to make. But
that's why so many
IPAs, if you put IPA pale ale on something, session IPA, tends to be that will fly out, and that's the thing. Like a stout sticks around a long time. Like you've got dark beer drinkers who will enjoy it and they'll really respect it, but it sticks around.
That comes
so
down
it's about
to
the balance of pace, and this is the thing, again, understanding the commercials of it, it's brewing, it's a balance, isn't it? Like you brew what you want to drink, you brew what people want to drink, and then you brew something in the middle as well, right? It's a juggling act.
Well, I'm old school, I'm a session. So I know that I went to New Zealand like 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And their session, I know, was 7%.
Yeah.
Same in America, yeah. It's kind of a contentious issue, really. A session beer could be anything between 3% to 5, 6, 7%.
I'm thinking, what's high about it?
Yeah.
Speaking of which,
we're on to another.
I want to make a statement asking a relevant question.
Relevant then.
First of all, I want to salute you for bringing the ginger along. As an ex-ginger, for me, it's very important.
Can I commend you for bringing along a chap from Sunderland? And he's not even thrown out yet. That's quite. I applaud you.
So I to be fair, not a million miles away.
Why don't you go back there?
I grew up in Cambridge, in Kent, so just down the road from the park in California. So as I was saying, I grew up on Section A. So I grew up in Kent. I studied in Birmingham and then moved down to London.
Well, my third question is really about. I was listening to radio today. I don't know if it's Heineken or Carlsberg, but they're saying about how damaging barley is to the environment.
Right.
And they're now going to get sheep to eat all the stuff, and then they're going to get sheep to crap on it, and then they're going to plant the barley because the nitrate stuff. Are you going to be that?
It's a good question. So. I mean, it's nice that Heineken. It's nice that Heineken greenwash like that, given the impact they have across the globe.
Going to have the same attitude.
So what we do? So yes, ideally yes. Our issue is we want to make beer with as much flavour as we can, but we do study our carbon impact. So we've just brought on a consultancy who's going to start measuring the carbon impact across our whole process. And there's a lot of debate in beer about this actually. Big global brands are saying, well, we're going to get sheep to crap on this and do this and do this. It sounds amazing, right? Yeah. But the damage they're having across the world is big. So as a drinker,
it's about thinking as a drinker, what is the lowest impact I can have? Quite honestly, the lowest impact is probably you guys walking to this place and drinking from a beer that has come, I'm not saying ours, but in London, right?
So doesn't that go hand in hand though with, you know, making or having establishments that you send your recipe to brew your beer, so it doesn't go to lorry, it doesn't go to truck? The kind of,
that's not what they.
No.
no, but what's that?
No, I get your point. So it's like you're outsourcing to those places, so you've got hubs. Yeah, and to be honest, I don't know that, but I would say the scale of that global reach, and then I guess it depends what you want to be as a company, right? Like any
Can I
company.
just say, sorry, Guinness for 120 years exported their formula around the world, and they lost sales because of it. And they realized back in the 80s or the 90s actually, where people would stop buying Guinness because it was so inconsistent. So what they said, they brought it all back into the Liffey, and they brew everything in the Liffey and send it out. And now what you get is something consistent. You never got that before. You thought you were getting it, you knew from one pub to another you weren't getting that, right? And that's just a representation how this idea of globalization is great, and it costs you so much shit, right?
But then, and I guess the challenge being like how do you act as a global beer maker, still making a product that can only be made locally, like without having an impact on the environment. So
It's easy. You look at your formula. If your formula includes living water, you book it.
yeah, but
You've got to have living water in your formula, right?
I guess how do you ship that around the world? How, you know, if you're professing to say you're
You then simulate something which is natural.
yeah.
And then it's a question of volume. Right? But there are two Guinnesses in the world.
Levels of sulfates and calcium levels.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can definitely do that by
Yeah.
heating.
Agree. Yeah. But they don't. Oh, they didn't.
Getting deep in there.
No,
Next
beer,
guys.
Yeah. It's a really, there's honestly,
Australian best-selling lagers.
as a
It's
question,
terrible in the UK because they're brewed in the UK.
and there's a lot of
in Australia. Yes, okay. Right?
it's a lot, and there's also like putting your beer through someone else's kit that's had someone else's beers through it. You know, like you
That's
don't.
your production line.
Yeah. So, but it is just to sort of close that off. It is a really really interesting question about how do we measure our impact. It's something we taking as one of our most serious challenges, but we're not there yet in terms of knowing exactly how to do it. Yes, sorry. Yes. So this is final beer of the night. This is where I think the big debate should have come about halfway through this beer, because this is, having said, I don't like mixing entry session strength for Scottish. This is our strongest beer that we're finishing with today. This is an 8% double IPA. A double IPA is defined by being stronger, basically. This is called the Even Greater Love Story. So I mentioned to you, we've got 3 beers that we always keep in stock at any one time. Our lager, the Tesco one you drank at the start, and then we have a beer quite similar. Oh, good luck, mate. A beer quite similar to a beer, premium strength. This is the M&S version. Yeah. So this is we have a pale ale that we keep in stock as well, called the Greatest Love Story, which is a tribute to Simcoe. So sometimes it's really nice just to brew one hop. I've talked about Mosaic a lot. I've talked about Simcoe briefly, that sweaty socks hop that gives you a little bit of earthiness. That is my absolutely favourite hop of all time, because it gives you all of that fruit bomb that a lot of kind of hazy beers, a lot of New England beers get, but it also gives you that sort of tang of something else. There's something there that's not just tropical fruits. It is socks, yeah. So this came out of my foot fetish. No, brewing with a single hop is a really, really nice challenge for a brewer, right? Because usually hops, as I said, do different things. Some give bitterness, some give you aroma, some give flavour. So trying to understand the exact characteristics of all 3 of those things with one
one hop variety is a really interesting challenge. So we'll always brew single hop beers, they're known as, just to understand what's going on with a hop, what's it do, what's it don't do. And Simcoe, we think, is a hop. Gives you a little bit of earthiness. It gives you kind of like sweet, like almost like lychee smell sometimes. It should be really quite sweet to initially taste, and then it should come through at the end with like earth, so that it's like a little bit dry. And so Simcoe is always for us a hop that we just absolutely love. We fell in love with it. So we have our first our kind of core pale ale called The Greatest Love Story, which is a tribute to our love affair with Simcoe, and this is its kind of older brother or older sister, if you like. This is the even greater love story. So we decided, last year when we were kind of developing our IPAs a lot, we were brewing a lot of single hop beers. We kind of developed The Greatest Love Story. We want to do that at double IPA strength this year. So you'll see a few more double IPAs coming out from us this year, which are 8%, 9% brewed with one hop. And they
Let's try to tell him to shut up.
No. I'll just finish this.
Just ignoring it.
Yeah. So this is the first of using one hop at 8%. What we should be getting from this is, as I said, those it should be a little bit of tropical fruit, like lychees on the nose, and I know I say that saying I never picked that out. I've kind of taught myself, like, I think that's what it is. We've got lychees in, we're like, yeah, we think that's what it gets on the nose. But, and then it should be coming through quite soft, quite easy. It should be quite sweet because we've now got a much higher alcohol level in this at 8%. So you should be getting a sweetness to this. But it shouldn't finish as pure sweet. If you remember that Murder She Wrote, where it kind of leaves you sticky and it leaves you sweet, this should still finish a little bit dry. So we often jokingly refer to this as a session double IPA, like one that you could actually probably try and sing tonight. Doesn't taste like, right? Just my view.
It's the whole thing again, a whole session
It's very easy session there, but actually it's very strong. So what does the double IPA mean?
Double is literally strength. So in the same way that,
way of brewing it?
so you use a lot more malt. So if you think of the process that we're talking about, so malts give their sugars, and that sugar gets converted into alcohol. So when you're brewing a more alcoholic beer, you use more malts to get more sugars that give you more alcohol at the end. Yeah. But that's all about.
It was a different process.
Yeah, no. So we're probably, I mentioned we use 300 to 400 kilos of grain in the previous beers, sitting around 5%. We'll probably use about 500 to 600, which is why also you obviously only have so much room in your tank, right? So when we brew a double IPA, we tend to brew like 2/3 worth of the batch because you can only get X amount of water, Y amount of grains in to make it. So they tend to be a little bit smaller batch. But to be honest, like these, it's
like stuffing more tea bags in a teapot, right, to get a stronger tea. Yeah, you can only fit so much in there with the amount of water. And again, it's been like a style that's been battered around a bit, where double IPA doesn't necessarily mean. A lot of people think it means like literally doubling the brew, right? Doubling the batch of grains and water that you're using. It's just a strong beer between like 6 to 8 or 9% usually. It's a stronger, fuller body.
Companies like Brewdog, right? Yeah. Brewdog say they've got a double dog, and then a triple dog. What does that really mean?
Again, it's just like varying,
straight. More for something that they're putting in earlier and more off, right?
Yeah.
But I think right now, I didn't know that before now.
I have a potentially stupid question. How do you make it stronger in alcohol?
So using, like we were saying in the mash tun, where we're weighing in all of our grains and putting in our water to extract all the sugars that give us the alcohol that we want from those grains. It's the ratio of grains to the water that we're using, right? Yes. So again, like James was just saying, like our mash tun is only so big. So the beers that we produce on that kit, when they're stronger, we get less beer because basically we're using more and more grains in X amount of water to strip more and more sugar out to then turn that all into alcohol. So an analogy that I'm quite proud of that I just came up with a second ago, being if you're brewing a pot of tea, right? If your pot is only this big, you can put 2 tea bags in that pot of tea, you still use X amount of water to fill it up. That would be a relatively weak tea, I suppose. If you then if you put six tea bags in there, you'd be able to fit less water in there, but you're getting more strength from all of the tea leaves that are in there. If that makes sense.
Yeah. But is it the sugar? So is it the sugar that makes?
Yeah, you're stripping a more concentrated amount of sugar into a lower amount of water.
Oh, okay, yeah.
There you go. I was trying to come up with tea analogies, and then I used said that, yeah. So it's like if you imagine you still get the same. So
It's like double concentrate scotch.
Yeah. So exactly. So if this was cordial, right? You can only fit so much water in this, right? If you had cordial up to here and then filled it with water, it would be that strong. If you got that much cordial in that much water, it would be fucking really strong. But you would probably get less of what we call a yield out of it. You get less beer out of that batch because you have to crop all of the sediment, all of the hops that we put into it. We eventually settle down and fall to the bottom, and then we crop them, which is like we have a port at the bottom. Have you ever seen a fermenting tank? They come down to a cone at the base.
Oh yeah.
Which is what we call a conical vessel. It comes down to a cone, which is like all the sediment, all the yeast, all the shrub falls down to the bottom, and then we crop it. Basically, just pull a lever at the bottom, and it lets all the sludge out, and then we close it again.
So, for anything, or is that just?
Not necessarily. We reuse it in cultivating our own yeast, but we're not big enough to do that.
Okay.
But all of that falls down to the bottom. But with those stronger beers, basically, you would get less beer out of it at the end because you're getting more falling down to the bottom that you have to take out again before you can actually package it into a beer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's drinkable. Otherwise, you have, like if you ever poured a beer out in the last centimetre of it,
you can't use,
well, it like comes through like really cloudy and really chubby, right?
Yeah.
Residual yeast or hops that maybe sat into the bottom. So yeah, it's questions like that that you think, it's really simple, but then when you try and explain it, I don't really know how to explain it. But cordial is a really good way of putting it. So yeah, if you normally do, this much water, that much cordial, it would be of a certain strength. But then if you did that much cordial and that much water, that would be a really strong drink, right? In that respect. So yeah, it's the same sort of thing. And then whenever we're mashing in a double IPA, you see it on our Instagram, we're like literally like stirring the mash around to strip all the sugars out, and literally like sloshing over the top of the tank and it's splashing all over the floor and it's getting it because we're literally trying to get as many grains into the vessel as we can, and then we're literally like laying the lids on the top of it to sit like this to lock over it, and like they're like sat like this high on the ground on a bed of orange basically, trying to cram as many grains to get as much sugars in there as we can, strip them all out, and then take that through into the kettle and boil off all the which is kind of why, from like a logistical point of view, it's kind of why a lot of the reason why we particularly don't brew too many super strong beers, because usually to go anything above maybe 8%-ish on the kit that we use, you'd have to double brew basically. So you brew, take all those sugars out, and then do it again to get extra sugars out to get up to like 12%, like imperial strength. But we can't be bothered to do it. We're too lazy, so
I'm aware we're at 10. I'm also aware that I probably got slower on that double IPA, even with just one sip. But has anyone else got anything else? I've got to say, debate-wise, talk about beer, talk about ingredients. This being like the hardest question. So very, very fucking long. Like definitely and there's some big debates. The one on like how do you stay sustainable at scale and how do these guys like I could go for days on that.
That's always going to be a
so
big
we'll come back.
argument now, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, no, yeah, sorry,
That thing behind you, is that yours or?
this one,
What is that?
that's, I think, a cleaning.
That's not cleaning, mate.
Can you drink it?
Sours on that paper.
I'm from the south, and I've never seen something like
That's what happens after an open stuff. It is, I'm just saying.
Thank you, like, honestly, it's such a good chat to have, and like, thanks for having us. And genuinely, like, I think, like, I talk about our beers being shit at the start. And, like,
your name's like not selling.
but I know there's like 101 of like that, but that is the story that we've had. And you know, Sarah and I step back and look at it and go, we haven't, like, absolutely blows us away that we would be here chatting to you guys, and you might not have drunk our beers, but would be interested to come and hear about them and drink about them and question them and challenge them and things like that. So honestly, from the bottom of my heart, like, it is the doing things like this, supporting these guys locally, but also supporting us and these guys saying, come along and do this. Like, it is the difference. Like a little bit, fuck what Heineken said on the radio. Like, that's not our world. Like, the difference is support local, like, really, like, small businesses like us.
It's sharing the love. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
we really feel that. So it genuinely blows me away. Like, from having faced down the barrel of it at the start of COVID, which I'm sure you guys.
We spoke to open during.
Yeah. Like, it's yeah, from having seen what that looks like to feeling that support, whether you like the beers, whether you don't, but engaging with us and challenging with us is support in itself. So yeah, honestly, a massive thank you from us, and hopefully, if you like the beers, please come and see us.
We've already planned the whole journey out.
And yeah, yeah, kind of like, I don't want to go all emotional, and but it does blow me away from being in a place where it's like, well, how do we make this work? To be in a place where it's like, actually, we get to come and chat about it.
Thank you very much.